Welcome to the Evolution Partners podcast, where I talk with the world's leading thinkers, planners, and doers who are helping to build great companies in their own way. We learn how the work they're doing is creating an impact and get to know a little bit more about them and what makes them tick. This episode is brought to you by Evolution Partners, where we help leaders to confidently build enduring great companies using our proven, structured, strategic planning process that ensures you build and execute the right plan. Check us out at evolutionpartners.com.au. Also, you can check out our books, Made to Thrive, outlining how to be a great CEO, as well as Onboarded, which is about making your new hires more effective faster. Welcome to the Evolution Partners podcast summer series. We're here with you all through the summer. We didn't give up. We are still here with you even into 2026. And so happy New Year. I hope you've had an enjoyable New Year and your 2026 is off to a great start. Today, I'm Brad Giles, joined as always by Richard and Andres, talking you through your summer. Today, we're talking about the weekly meeting, a very interesting topic we like to begin with, and something that we call the one phrase opener. And I guess we're emulating what we want people in meetings to do, is to start with some kind of icebreaker, despite how badly I botched this one up. So with all of that preface, Rich, do you want to kick us off? How are you feeling in this new year?
I'm feeling energized and a sense of excitement.
Very nice. And Andreas?
I'm feeling, I wouldn't say the word that I have in mind is expectation. And that's because we are 3 months away from receiving in this world our second daughter. And I have so many feelings in my mind and in my heart, but the expectation is probably what comes to mind.
Second daughter, what a gift. What a gift. Mine is New Year's resolution. Why would it not be? There is only 1 week when you can say New Year's resolution out of 52, so why not? So expectation, excitement, New Year's resolution. I mean, it's contextual to the time of year. I think when I think about the weekly meeting and I think about New Year's resolutions, if there's one thing that I would encourage leaders straight off the bat to do is to think, if my weekly meeting was better, what would be different? In the first year that we work with teams, what we're trying to do is build an execution machine. No point having the best strategy in the world if you can't execute it. So we've got to build an execution machine, getting really, really good at the meetings, the priorities, the KPIs, embedding that, making sure. Now, if you can move faster, we can move faster, but we've got to make sure that we can execute really well as a leadership team. As I zoom down, the key to that, the first thing in the first quarter that we really want everyone to do is to have effective weekly meetings. For me, if we do an initiation workshop with a leadership team, what we're asking for the first 13 weeks, if nothing else, just have effective weekly meetings. That is the beginning, the key. Start to be good at that. So every business system focuses on these 3 areas: priorities, metrics, meeting rhythm, to different varieties. But the weekly meeting is where the teams slip into updates and noise rather than creating an engine of execution. At the center of effective execution is this weekly meeting where we get the leadership team to come back together on a regular cadence that enables the business to pulse faster. It's really, really important. It's not the water cooler catch-ups, the one-on-one. It's learning, growing, beginning to build peer accountability. So what we're really tackling is a simple question: what does a weekly meeting or a great weekly meeting look like? What goes wrong in the bad ones? And why does this single meeting determine whether a quarter succeeds or slips away? There's certainly other meetings, daily huddles that we're all familiar with, monthly meetings, quarterlies and annuals. But the weekly meeting is how we tie the quarters together. Rich, any initial reflections on the topic?
I just think of it in these simple terms. A great weekly meeting is like an injection of rocket fuel for your week. It just sets the tone. And when you get it right, it's just wonderful. When you don't, it's just almost like a letdown for the start of the work week. And we just don't want that.
Yeah, good insight. Andres?
I'm glad that this episode is coming out after Christmas. Christmas is all about the surprises. and enjoying that surprise when you open those boxes. But the weekly meeting is the opposite of that. When you get to a quarterly workshop, let's call it like that, or at the end of the month, perhaps, if you have surprises about your numbers or the progression of the priorities or the commitments, it reflects back on the weekly meeting.
That's interesting. So I guess the carpenter has 100 tools in their toolkit. The nurse, maybe 50 or 100. Different people have different toolkits, but the leader of a business really has only one tool, and that's meetings. So you better get good at meetings, because if you're not good at meetings, what other mechanism do you have as a tool to do your job, which is to grow the people of the business to be highly effective in their roles and their functions? You've got to get to become a master at this tool. So how do teams end up with weekly meetings that aren't effective? And I mean, we've all been in ineffective meetings. There's accusations that businesses have far too many meetings, and that might be justified. But no one wants to sit in a bad meeting. So how do teams end up with weekly meetings that are not effective and maybe just feel like they're going through the motions? Rich?
Yeah, I think, we touched on this, I think, last year in one of the podcasts, but I feel like when weekly meetings become sort of almost like a one-to-one, that becomes the de facto style. And so it's really just more about a narrative, storytelling, and personal perspective sharing, and it's not focused on topics of importance. Nobody wants a bad meeting, but it's so easy to step into it. Start on time, finish on time. It goes by the wayside. There's an agenda or not, as the case may be. That's the bad version. There's not a purpose for the meeting. Like, the purpose is not to meet. The purpose is to achieve something. And I like to think about it as this is 1 week out of 12 or 13 weeks in the quarter ahead. And it's the 1 week of what do we do differently to win? What do we do differently to be different versus our competition? And then, the all-time worst possible example of weekly meetings is when they get canceled because we're too busy. When I hear that, it just makes me almost tense up, because, when we're too busy to discuss the business is going to start to drift.
The primary role of a leader is to discuss the business. It's like the carpenter saying, I've decided not to use my tools. Now I'm going to either outsource my job or I'm going to try and work this wood with my hands. We cannot. If you're skipping meetings, I really would encourage people to look in the mirror. Andreas?
I think probably I sat in weekly meetings, I would probably say hundreds of them, different clients, my own weekly meetings. And one thing that I observed is many businesses have meetings, whether it's weekly, fortnightly, or monthly. But probably building on what you said, Richard, it's not clear what they really want to get out of the meeting. So they go person by person. All right, so tell us about the last week or two. And the person goes for 15 minutes talking about from high-level stuff to low-level stuff. And they go down trying to solve the problem on the spot. That takes another 20 minutes. And the next person goes, and the next person goes. So you can see this is like a 2-hour meeting where it drains everyone's energy. But no one actually had that clarity on what are the most important things that we need to discuss today to keep company momentum. What are the numbers? What are the priorities? What are the decisions or commitments that we need to make in this session? And when that happens, most people cannot help but feeling, well, if this is going to drain my energy, I'd rather skip that. Or how can I get out of that meeting? Or the worst thing, well, how can I actually just say something so superficial that they will skip me and we'll move on to the next meeting?
I think about a team I met with a few weeks ago before Christmas, and they said they had made their weekly meeting 30 minutes. And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. Because this is the most important people in the business doing their most important meeting for the week. And are you able to get it all done? And is it working for you? I guess the overarching, before we get way too prescriptive, the overarching thing I want to leave with the audience is that we're providing examples of best practice. Your job is to figure out, how do you get best practice to work best in your environment. And that's what we say to people all the time. But in this business, I mean, this is a $90 million business, right? They might think that they're saving time by going from an hour or 90 minutes to 30 minutes in a week. But once I dug into the agenda, they were reviewing operational updates only. They weren't talking about their priorities. They weren't doing collective intelligence. When you get all of the leaders together, this is the opportunity to make the decisions. And so their priorities are not getting done in that team. They're slowing down their progress. So I would say that the job is to meet with the leadership to update and align. Leaders in ineffective meetings are chasing the urgent over the important. So we've got 1 hour per week to realign and then to bring back to everyone, reset, realign, and say what is the important rather than the urgent things that we're working on, or else you just never execute the medium and long-term components of your plan. So what goes wrong? If that's what goes wrong, then what goes right? So what's a great weekly meeting look like that makes it so effective, and why are we encouraging that for listeners?
I remember I was actually sitting at the weekly meeting of one of my clients here in Perth. And so they said at the end, well, what do you think? What are the 1 or 2 things that we can do to improve? So I did ask them a couple of questions. The first question was, do you feel like on a weekly basis, you are discussing the most important things? Question number 2, are your numbers a surprise at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter? Number 3, are you very, very, very clear on what are the actions and commitments out of this meeting until we meet again? When the team reflected on those questions, they said, well, actually, I'm not happy with either of the answers of those questions. So that was the first reflection point, perhaps, to shift from, all right, what do we consider to be a good meeting for us? Now, the format of the agenda, we can discuss if we want to start with this or that topic. Let's assume that we will have an agenda, of course. But it was that reflection point of those 3 questions that brought us to a much better mindset to discuss, all right, this is what works for us.
Yeah, I think for me, I always try and relate it to it's a series of compounding steps. So I always ask, are we 1/12 or 1/13 closer to achieving the aspiration for the quarter, which then leads to all of the boring things that need to be in a great meeting, an agenda, clear topic areas, so on and so forth. But the other thing I always say to them is we don't all need to talk. Meaning, if you're green on your metrics, your priorities, your work that needs to be done, the 1/12 for this week or the 1/13 for this week, depending on how long the quarter is, it's okay. Your job then is to contribute to the areas that are yellow or red, right? Because I think sometimes we think that meetings mean that it's a complete democracy and that everybody must have their time. It's okay sometimes if you've got nothing to say, simply because I have nothing to say that's adding value to making a better decision, creating more cohesion, or getting better alignment. And I think it's those sorts of things that are, when they're done well, the meeting is just like, as I said earlier, a rocket fuel moment of injection of vitality into what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think we've got to recalibrate and align or realign. I think that whilst I mentioned before 1 year, our job is to build, or year 1, our job is to build a execution machine. A part of that is beginning the context of peer accountability. It does draw from Pat Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team somewhat, but really we're trying to get it normalized for leaders in an executive team to hold other people accountable. To say, hang on, you said that you were going to do 21 last week and you did 16, and that's like the 15th week in a row. Do you need help? I think that you're the right person for the job, but do you need help? Are you under-resourced? What's really going on here? Because in a team, if one person is failing, really we're all going to suffer the consequences. I think that there's another part, which is an agenda that is stuck to. The old adage is no agenda, no attender. So that should be for any meeting, but especially the weekly meeting should have a standing agenda and evolve that as you see best over time. But you want to stick to that. And then the next part is what we call collective intelligence. And so that is, what are the big decisions that we need to make this week? So collective intelligence, as a broad best practice, we would say might constitute 50% of the time of a meeting, which might seem quite remarkable for people. But we need to make decisions, and we need to make decisions as a team. So people must come prepared. It is an absolutely critical, essential component. If anyone rocks up to a meeting and they say, "Oh, what are we here to talk about again?" Probably close your book and walk out. Because if people aren't coming prepared, it's lazy and it's disrespectful and it's just ineffective. And I would rather, if someone says that, spend the whole time of that meeting saying, this is what it means to come prepared to a meeting. So thank you for indulging me in my nag, but collective intelligence 50% of the time. What are the big decisions? So for example, the sales manager this week is going to give us a 10-minute presentation on what the dynamics are within the sales team and what they're planning to do about it. And then we need to make a decision whether or not we're going to buy this new software. That's the kind of thing that you want to see at collective intelligence. Again, a construct, a component of that weekly meeting. So it makes me think about a software company that I worked with a few years ago. And we introduced this concept of collective intelligence where it was very foreign. They thought the weekly meeting was metrics update and maybe even a status update on priorities only, with a bit of employee and customer feedback thrown in there. But once we really dug into the purpose of collective intelligence and we said, let's make that 50% of the time of their meeting, they made big decisions much faster and they were able to pulse much faster. Like, it was really fascinating to see how that change occurred. So yes, Andres.
I just thought of a story from a construction company in New Zealand that we're working with, and they implemented these 3 questions in their weekly meeting that it worked so well for them. The first question is, what have you achieved in terms of your priorities over the last 7 days? What haven't you achieved? And what are you going to achieve in the next week? With a caveat of, what can get in the way, perhaps. What can get in the way was probably the trigger for them to increase that peer accountability. Because people will say, well, look, actually, in the next week, I'll be super, super busy with this, and that, so I won't be able to do anything.
Yeah.
That's their cue to jump in. Hold on. Okay, maybe 1 week, that's okay, but maybe if that happens 2 weeks in a row, there's a pattern there. So what can we do to help? And it works so well for the dynamics of that team that it's not up to the CEO to tell them when they need to jump in. That is their cue. And they all go and help each other to move the most important things forward. As you said, Richard, we are 12 weeks or 11 weeks or 10 weeks closer to the due date of our quarterly priorities. How do we realign? Now, I would love to say that was their invention, but obviously they got inspired by your book, Brad, Made to Thrive, where you state the last 7, next 7. But it worked so, so well for them.
Yeah, so that's in the accountability section, or the accountability role, 5 roles of a leader: accountability, ambassador, culture, strategy, succession planning. So we talk about what goes wrong and what right or great looks like. If you're an owner who's sitting there saying, this might be a worthy New Year's resolution, in a year, I'd like to have much, much better weekly meetings. What is the first step? How do we fix that? Any examples of how we can fix this situation?
Well, I'll tell you a little story. So I worked with this technology services business, and charismatic, strategic, wonderful leader. All of the outward facing roles were on hyperdrive. But I tell you, he ran the worst weekly meetings on the face of the planet. Like, there could not possibly be a worse meeting.
Mate, there's a lot of competition there.
No. I could go into more detail, but let's just say he could nail the acknowledgement of country, and he could tell you about his footy team score on the weekend, but you never knew what came next. So yes, there was all of the lacking of agenda and clear structure and preparation before the meeting. But actually, the one way we suggested to fix it was, okay, you're not good at this, but we need these meetings to be effective. So we actually appointed, the role at the time, we had the luxury of being able to have a chief of staff.
Yep.
But that person's role was to facilitate a standard agenda and to keep it on track. And then the CEO, for a period of time, became an agenda item. And it was just a subtle way to get him to understand that the rhythm of a meeting, the structure of a meeting, the importance of the meeting, and to see how much more effective it was when he was seeing those things happen consistently and on a repeatable basis. We eventually graduated back to he was the owner of the meeting and the facilitator of the meeting, but it was just a simple thing where we just couldn't waste any more time trying for him to master the skill. We had to show him what good looked like. And I mean, that's a strange and perhaps extreme example, but otherwise the team would leave every week going, so what's next? What's the priority? Where are we at? Where are we going? And then it led to more and more dysfunction until we had that sort of circuit breaker.
I think you raise a really good point that if you're crappy at running a meeting, then don't run the meeting. Appoint a chair. And the chair is like a traffic cop in the context of a weekly meeting. Their job is to keep things flowing. The great problem that many teams run into is rabbit holes. The job of the leadership team is to get the job done, not to chase rabbits down rabbit holes, because suddenly it's like, well, we've missed all of those items, but we had a really interesting discussion with no resolution on these few topics. So every meeting needs a chair. Every meeting needs someone who will say, let's move it on. It's time to move on to the next agenda. It can be, but it doesn't need to be the leader. If you're not good at it, then don't do it. It's as simple as that.
One more thing, knowing that we started the question in the new year, in 12 months' time, what do we want to be different with our weekly meetings? Book them in advance. I can think of this company, they had 3 meeting rooms in their office. And sometimes they would say, well, we can't have the weekly meeting for the leadership team because the 3 meeting rooms are booked. And, there's some sensitivity with the topics that we want to discuss. So we don't want to do it in the kitchen. So let's keep that one. Book them in advance. Everyone should know in the leadership team when, what time, where. They need to know the agenda so they can prepare. That will bring transparency as well. And even peer accountability when someone is booking a sales meeting on top of the weekly meeting, or someone is booking a marketing meeting on top of the weekly meeting, what takes priority?
Yeah.
So for this company, everything else is a priority but the weekly meeting. So when we changed that, we booked them in advance. And this is the same New Zealand company, by the way. The CEO wasn't the chair. Because the CEO was the one booking marketing meetings on top of that weekly meeting. So someone else stepped in and said, all right, we're going to book the meeting in a different day, different time, and no one will book anything else on this time. This is going to be our time, our priority. 52 meetings in 1 year, purely for ourselves. And it changed the dynamics. It changed also the way in which they saw that meeting. It wasn't a draining meeting or something that hopefully I can skip. But people were willing to go in and share what was happening. The structure was much better. And at the end, they could answer, yeah, this wasn't a good meeting, a meeting that we leave clear on and what we need to achieve until we meet again.
I would just say start with a commitment for 13 weeks. Set an agenda. Figure out what best practice looks like for you. Icebreaker, which might be something like good news. Icebreaker, update on your priorities, employee customer feedback, update on your metrics, collective intelligence. Whatever it is, there's plenty of examples. Find the one, stick to it, the agenda. If you need to, get everyone to put their phones in a bucket if they are acting like 2-year-olds. Get the people to be focused and come prepared for that meeting rather than talking off the cuff. Like, it is so important. So build, and it makes me think about a leader that I worked with who did just this: build an agenda, set the agenda, and make the commitment to stick to it for 13 weeks. So I guess what do all of these stories and best practices have in common? I think that it is about, I suppose, repeating what I just said. It is about knowing that this is the beginning of great execution, getting the leadership team to come together, fixed agenda, complete commitment, nothing else becomes more important, and you work through the big issues, aiming to achieve the budget, the metrics of the business, achieve the priorities along the path to the strategy, and to build an execution machine and a level of peer accountability in a cohesive, confident leadership team. So for an owner listening right now, what do you think that they should do to act on this issue? Richard?
Have great meetings. Sorry, that's just too easy. No, I mean, at the risk of repeating, I think it's just start small, be consistent, make it a priority, and actually maybe just add one task to the end of the meeting. What's your reflection on the meeting today? What could have been better?
That's an interesting, good one. Thank you. Andreas?
Yeah. Well done, Richard. You said the one that I was thinking about. So that makes me think of something else. As you set the agenda, as we said, the one that works for you, then book them in advance and make the team come prepared. Sometimes it takes 10 minutes to think about, what are the topics that I really want to share with the team? What are the key things that we want to take out of the meeting? So we leave confident that it was a good meeting, and it will give us confidence that we are closer towards the completion of our priorities and quarterly numbers. Probably the one thing to consider is what will give us enough information so we get to the end of the month or the end of the quarter and we'll have no surprises.
My reflection is, if you are a leader, you have one tool, and are you masterful at that tool, being meetings? If not, you better get masterful at it, because if you only have one tool with which to do your job and you're not masterful at it, you're going to pay the price. So become masterful, understand agendas, all of the things that we've spoken about today. So let's move to close with one takeaway for leaders on this topic from each of us. Rich?
Meetings build trust, and trust is the foundation of a great and functional team. And if you can frame it in that terms, then maybe that's a higher purpose. I'm building trust, not holding a meeting. I'm building trust.
Andres?
Those not having a meeting, have a meeting. Just start. The first 13. And for those having already the meeting, what is the one thing, based on what Richard mentioned before, that you can do to get it better? The idea is to get better and better and better.
Mine is more meetings is not better, but better meetings matter. So hopefully we've today offered you a bit of a different perspective on the weekly meeting, maybe a few takeaways is I suppose what we hope for. Thank you for joining us today on the summer series. I hope that your new year is off to a good start. I hope that you are on the path to having a better 2026. You can find us at evolutionpartners.com.au. You can also find our books, Made to Thrive, which is about the 5 roles of a CEO, and Onboarded, which is about getting your new hires to be more effective, faster, and then bigger isn't better, better is better, avoiding the pressure for endless growth to build a better business and life. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to your company again next week. Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. If you'd be kind enough to leave a review for the podcast, that'd be really helpful to other like-minded entrepreneurs, and then we can grow our community. If you want to find out more about our guests, head over to evolutionpartners.com.au/podcast, where you can find show notes and other additional reading. Hope to see you back next week. Until then, keep thriving.